Danilo Taka from Borinquen. Anark, who is considered himself an anarchist YouTuber, did a video about why Marxist-Leninism doesn't work. This video was pretty shit. Coming from an anarchist myself, his critique was pretty bad. It's like basically a list of Wikipedia about, oh, they want social democracy. Not, that's not what Marxism is to begin with. It's just conflating Stalinism and Maoism and their Vanguard model and Bernie Sanders' approach to revolution. I have no idea what he meant. But there are better critiques against the why the Soviet world, the second world, like Soviet Union, Maoist China, Castro's Cuba, today's like Vietnam, Laos, North Korea, and various other countries that are trying to attempt socialism or communism that is not anarchist, like they have a hierarchical society, right? Versus anarchist societies, which they do exist throughout the world. The Zapatistas is one example. We also have, up until recently, the Rojava, who was sadly decimated by the combined effort of fascist Turkey, and now the Al Qaeda ruled Syria, with some effort of ISIS as well, three against one of all sides, and now basically Rojava as an anarchist society doesn't exist anymore. You also had the Savrata movement in Sri Lanka, which is the largest movement in Sri Lanka based on anarchist pacifist principles under the philosophy of Gandhi. There's like somewhere around 30 million people living there, right? It's been around since the 50s, right? And you also had the geographic location of Somia, right, which is part of like the eastern side borders of India all the way to Southeast Asia, which is the geographic size of Europe with a population around 100 million people. And it's been a resisting nation states for like 2,000 years by various indigenous groups throughout that area, right? At some levels, right? They have their own unique societies. Not all of them are anarchists, like some of them do have some form of hierarchies, right? But for the most part, it is very decentralized. And also the sample of the kibbutz movement, which sadly is often associated with Israeli fascism, right? But today, 1/3 of all kibbutz still maintain what is supposed to be the original principles of the kibbutz, which is an anarchist system, right? So they do exist as well in the millions, tens of millions even, right? In very large regions, right? And the failure of Marxism is they become hierarchical state capitalist societies, right? If the Soviet world in general, not just specifically, like for example, only Maoist China and Stalin's Russia, right? If to be more specific, why? Let's start with the Soviet Union. When Lenin's interpretation of Marx was that communism is born from capitalism, then a society must transition from capitalism to socialism, and then socialism to communism, which predicts basically an end of history because under Marxism it has an economic determinism, right? The first stage is a violent revolution to gain control of the state and put the party, in Lenin's case the vanguard, in charge. As long there is a state, there is capitalism. Because, like Mikhail Bakunin has predicted, that state socialism will become state capitalism. Putting the industry under state control instead of the public ownership of the means of production, socialization of the means of production, we have state ownership instead, which becomes the state capital production, right? Thus, the Soviet Union, and by consequence, every country that trying to model themselves after Russia, like China, Cuba, Laos, Vietnam, etc. Then we went beyond the state capitalist phase. Lemon himself established state capitalism by arguing that capitalist development was necessary, that state monopoly capitalism is inevitable and avoidable implies a step or more than one step towards socialism. That's basically what Lenin understood, right? And Lenin used Germany as an example of his state capitalist model, right? And even Mao Zedong, whether he was in power, he admitted as such that China under his reign was capitalist. And Fidel Castro, when he's doing his foreign policies, right, to liberate the people in Africa, that he says like, we're state capitalists, not market capitalists, even by their own admission, right? You also had Laos with their Soviet-style state enterprises, or Cuba right now with market style developments. These are all extension of Lenin's state capitalist economic policy. There's no such thing, as socialism by any stretch of the imagination under these things. And why Marxism, Leninism, right, or Stalinism and Maoism, which is just a Chinese version of Stalinism, right, fail because they did not create socialism, but instead state capitalist bureaucratic autarky by trying its best to keep their power, and only a select few can have power and enjoy the riches, while the people who had to repeat the struggle of their pre-revolution to some extent feudalistic lifestyle, like we see in Hungary, Yugoslavia, Vietnam, Czechoslovakia, were one of the technically better places to live compared to the Soviet Union and China, right? They tend to be less authoritarian overall, but still pretty authoritarian. They lie to the people. These so-called revolutionaries lie to the people when they say the people will be in charge. With the instead of the common ownership of the means of production, with retaining respect to personal property, right, like your toothbrush, for example, along with collect their own items and with the consumption based of the guiding principles, each according to his abilities, each according to his needs. These followers of Lenin, they betray the people, and when people who are revolutionary, doesn't have to be anarchists, it could be other Marxists as well, found out that Lenin institutional workers' control were undermined and the state undertook the role, and Lenin and later his successors like Mao, Stalin, for example, used the power from above to attack the factory committees and trade unions, if they exploit the popular interest of the people to subordinate them, and all enterprises should be answered to the state instead of the workers' council, and prevent council workers to run their own affairs and impose from the top down and oppress anarchists and left communists, right? If the It's like they reject the basic idea of socialism, which is the industry should be at the hands of the workers, and promote a hierarchical and capitalist idea of centralization, thus create a secret police to attack anarchists. Like they raided 26 anarchist centers in Moscow shortly after the Bolshevik took control, and killing anarchists when they found out Lenin's capitalist method of micromanaging workers. Hell, even Lenin himself has said, and I quote, questioning submission to a single will is absolutely necessary. That's an actual quote, by the way. This same principle that Mao Zedong and every the leader in the Soviet world used the method that Lenin had, and anarchists in the Soviet world lost all their influence when the Soviets see them as a threat and use authority to take possession of industries. And even Trotsky defended Lenin's state capitalist society when he gave the idea of concentration camps and believed that the Soviets hierarchical state capitalist countries were entitled to assert its dictatorship. That's why from 1917, during Lenin's reign, to 1991, during the last leaders of the Soviet world had abandoned socialism, attacking anarchists for basic rights, and socialism was completely destroyed, and even destroying social institutions, becoming counter-revolutionaries and anti-socialists. Thus, people who support left unity have only to support all left-wing views, but we must reject this Leninist model because every time they go, they betray the revolution time and time again. Hell, even right now, China, which is also a capitalist society, right? If the most of their foundation for their success wouldn't exist without the help of anarchists, right? We can't forget that Mao Zedong suppression of anarchists who wanted to make their own society and rejected Lenin's democratic centralism, despite it was anarchists that laid the foundation of the Chinese Communist Party and radical political discourse and activity that Maoism is famously originally from Chinese anarchism, were initially identified with anarchist vision of social revolution. They even Mao wanted a confederation of communes, which is an anarchist society. The concept of integrated agriculture industry, which China became the leaders of this field, was created by anarchists. The education system was started by a Chinese French anarchist, activists. Labor learning was created by anarchists during the May 4th period. The Chinese Communist Party used mutual aid to small degree collectives during the revolution. The People's Village and factory were based on Peter Kropotkin's ideas in field factories and workshops. If the founder of the Chinese Communist Party, Li Dazhao and Chen Duxiu, were disciples of anarchist Cai Yongpei. The Diligent Worker Frugal Study Program was founded by the anarchists, which one of their students was Deng Xiaoping. Anarchists made the first unions, started the first May Day in China. The first Marxist group were dominated by anarchists. Early Marxists, were believe in anarcho-Bolshevism to co-opt the establish a new society. And the first Socialist Party was founded by anarchists. Thus, without anarchism, most people who are on the left who simp over China will not exist as it is without anarchists laying the groundwork before these same the Marxist Chinese, later Maoists betrayed them, even though they're the reason they exist to begin with. They helped them lay the groundwork. But sadly, despite Mao's anarchist influence and a small anarchist society were established temporarily, he took down all anarchist groups as being reactionary and nationalistic and imperialistic methods like taking control of Tibet. Chinese government lent military support to Sri Lanka the state against Trotskyist uprisings to oppose the independence of Bangladesh from Pakistan. In order to avoid formation of Soviet-oriented state to its west, recognize the new Pinochet regime. After the Soviet and Cuban Orient Allende government was overthrown in a coup to support the UNITA, an Angolan political party also backed by the U.S. They also supported apartheid South Africa. In a UN vote, they voted against Puerto Rico having its independence. This is during Mao Zedong's reign. And despite Maoist passive imperialism, its military strategy is flawed, like the idea that soldiers should not be organized democratically, which many Maoists use this to a very authoritarian extreme, like the Shiny Path in Peru, or constant infighting among revolutionary groups, like the Macheteros in Puerto Rico. Soldiers under Maoist theory are not allowed to debate about military or political policy, just obey the orders from the people at the top. And the concept of a united front, unlike, for example, left unity, or platformism, this approach that Maoists join forces with the enemy, which has happened during the Chinese Civil War and the Cultural Revolution. Like nationalist right wing, this approach you allow people who are not in the interest of the people to join among your ranks. And let's not forget, Mao Zedong destroyed the last remaining attempt at an anarchist society in China, which was the People's Commune of China, the Shanghai Commune, the last true resistance of revolution. Hell, their dialectical philosophy, doesn't even goes against reality either. Hell, even the CIA used postmodern literature to create conflict among socialist and communist groups as part of their co-inter program, you know.